Chosen one, welcome home. This is not just another message in your feed. It is a divine interruption, a sacred summons, a mirror held to your spirit so you may finally remember who you've always been. You didn't find this by chance. You weren't scrolling out of boredom. Heaven led you here. Spirit whispered, and your soul responded, because the time has come not to become, but to remember what you carry and why it was given to you. Silence was never surrender. It was sacred strategy. While the world chased noise and shallow validation, you were growing deep, where no hand could sabotage what was being built in secret. And if no one has spoken it over you lately, let me be the voice ordained for this moment. You are a blueprint, a force, a living prophecy. You are chosen. You walk with invisible fire and unshakable favor. You did not just survive the storm, you surpassed the very battlefield they thought would bury you. Before we go further, I speak honor to every soul who has supported this mission. Whether you gave with your hand or uplifted with your words, know this: your light fuels something far greater than you know. And if you have not given, understand this too: your presence alone is precious. Your energy is felt. You are seen. And if the fire is stirring in your bones right now, if your spirit is trembling with the knowing that this message is yours, then consider this your confirmation. Your support keeps the voice of purpose moving, reaching others who, like you, were never meant to blend in. You are not part of the noise. You are the signal. They thought you needed attention to evolve. They thought you needed applause to rise. But you learned how to ascend in silence. You rebuilt in the unseen. And that, chosen one, is what shook them, while they watched your stillness with confusion. You were studying the field like a general. While they underestimated your pause, you were redesigning your entire destiny. You were not broken, you were being reborn. And now, the steps they cannot trace are the ones that led you beyond their reach. The soil they buried you in became sacred ground, your training ground. This is not a comeback. You are the comeback. What's coming is not just blessing, it is reversal. It is revelation. It is resurrection. So undeniable that even those who counted you out will be silenced by your rise. You are the answer they never saw coming. The silence they mocked has become the storm they cannot forecast. You are proof that legacy speaks louder than noise, that peace is more powerful than revenge, that God hides his fiercest warriors in quiet places before the unveiling. And now, chosen one, I ask you, mark this moment. Type 1999 not as a number, but as a seal, a spiritual declaration that you are ready for what is already yours. We are not stepping in with fear. We are stepping in with fire. Your silence has spoken. Your story has shifted. And now, you walk not as a victim of the past, but as the vessel of divine purpose. You stayed silent, and that is why you won. They thought you were passive. They thought your quiet was weakness. But your stillness was never confusion. It was clarity. Your silence was never surrender. It was sacred restraint. You weren't ignoring the chaos, you were outgrowing the need to answer it. While they tangled themselves in drama, you stood still, not frozen, not afraid, but focused. And if you ever wondered why they worked so hard to provoke you, it's because somewhere deep within, they could feel the power of your restraint. They felt what you carried, even when they didn't understand it. Your refusal to react wasn't because you didn't see the game, it's because you already knew you'd won before the first move was made. Your patience wasn't a delay, it was posture. You didn't stay silent because you lacked words. You stayed silent because you carried wisdom. You knew not every war deserves your sword. You weren't inactive, you were instructed. Your silence was strategy, a holy tactic, a mark of mastery, and it terrified them. For the Lord fought for you while you stood still. Exodus 14:14. And that shook them more than anything your voice could have done, because they depended on noise to distract, to distort, to derail. But when every trap fell into the void of your peace, they were left facing what they tried to project on you, their own shadow. Isn't it divine irony? Chosen one, how they craved your reaction but were met instead with your absence, and that absence thundered louder than any scream could ever reach. Look back and ask yourself, how many times did you stare into the hollow eyes behind their masks, and yet chose silence? How often did betrayal sting your spirit like fire, and still you wrapped yourself in dignity instead of vengeance? That wasn't weakness, that was holy restraint, that was divine intelligence flowing through you. The same sacred stillness Jesus held as he stood before Pilate, accused and surrounded, yet he uttered not a word, and the governor marveled because silence is never empty when it is filled with purpose. While they unraveled in schemes and noise, your purpose was rising, steady and unseen, like the sun behind the clouds waiting for its divine unveiling. They laid traps in your path, hoping to see you stumble, but you walked by untouched, unshaken, not because the traps weren't real, but because your energy did not validate them. Think of Mandela. 27 years in a prison meant to silence him, erased, hidden, forgotten. But even there, his silence was strategy. His soul was not shrinking, it was strengthening. He emerged not with bitterness, but with brilliance. Not as a prisoner, but as a prophet. And the earth shifted. Isn't that the very thing happening within you? You are not simply enduring injustice, you are rewriting what power looks like. Real power does not clamor for recognition. It watches, it listens, it waits, and when it moves, it does so with a force so precise. The atmosphere itself cannot remain the same. That's what happened when you stepped away, not with drama, not with rage, but with sacred clarity. You didn't slam the door, you simply walked through it, and the illusion collapsed behind you. Some ask, why didn't you expose them? Why didn't you strike back? But you knew the law of higher ground. Do not repay evil with evil, nor insult with insult, but with blessing, for to this you were called. 1 Peter 3:9. They mistook your softness for surrender, but it was strength under the command of heaven. They could not comprehend that your silence was soaked in discernment. Every moment you withheld your voice, you were gathering insight. You weren't reacting, you were recording. Not with vengeance, but with vision. You saw the cycles. You studied the traps. You memorized the performance before the curtain was even drawn. Like Diana, surrounded by deceit and protocol, yet she carried herself with grace that transcended position. She didn't wield a sword, she radiated truth. Her silence turned palaces upside down. And so does yours. You are unforgettable, not because you were loud, but because you were untouchable. Because you did not play their game, you dismantled it by refusing to participate. And that, chosen one, is power. They could not crack the mirror you held up to them. They couldn't infect the stillness you embodied. You were not passive, you were protective. You preserved peace while they weaponized chaos. You guarded destiny while they rehearsed lies. And while they plotted your reaction, you planted your roots. Do you remember Chadwick Boseman quietly fighting a war in his body while giving the world a legacy it could not ignore? His silence was sacred, his mission uninterrupted. And when he departed, it left a reverence that echoed far beyond applause. That is the sound your silence is creating, not noise, but reverence, not drama, but destiny. You don't need to expose them. The truth always surfaces, especially when it is carried by a soul that walks with integrity. And here you are, still rising, still anchored, still chosen. Even fools are thought wise when they remain silent. Even the undiscerning gain respect when they hold their tongue. Proverbs 17:28. Your silence has become your shield. Your refusal to stoop has become your elevation. And as they spiral, trying to figure out how they lost the battle you never even fought, they are left to confront their greatest fear. You were never confused. You were never weak. You were never unaware. You were discerning. You were directed. You were divinely positioned. And every time you chose stillness over shouting, you reclaimed power they never knew you had. Every silent moment was a strike they never saw coming. Malala stood silenced by violence, left for dead, but her quiet fire changed global systems. And so too has yours. This silence you walk in is not absence, it is strategy. It is alignment. It is prophecy unfolding. So keep walking in the quiet, chosen one. Keep trusting the discernment that heaven has placed within you. Set a guard over your mouth. Lord, keep watch over the door of my lips. Psalm 141:3. You are not missing anything by not responding. You are mastering something far greater, divine timing. And in divine timing, everything shifts. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them spin their stories. You've already won, and you did it without ever raising your voice. What they once called complex was never confusing to you. You had already traced the pattern. You had already read the blueprint. You saw the full play while they were still practicing the script. Like a master architect sees the flaws in a crumbling structure. You began to see through the false foundations of their behavior. What they called complexity was simply repetition, masked with emotional theatrics. It wasn't rebellion, it was revelation. You saw the cycle, the loop dressed up as nuance, the guilt dressed up as concern, the traps wrapped in flattery. How many times did they expect you to loosen your boundaries just to keep the peace? How many times did they lean on your compassion as a cover for their chaos? But something holy stirred inside of you, and you stopped the loop. You chose clarity over chaos. You chose soul over cycle. And when the time came, there was no dramatic exit, no final monologue, because when the soul matures, it no longer needs to shout. It simply moves. And that's what disarmed them the most. They were prepared for a fight. You gave them a quiet ending. You didn't leave from bitterness. You left from wisdom, not to punish, but to preserve. And in that preservation, you reclaimed every piece of your energy. They thought they were molding a fragile heart, but they were unknowingly sharpening a resilient one. Your silence, weighted with discernment, became the loudest revelation. They underestimated you because you didn't perform, but the depth of your seeing, your ability to read through illusion without responding to it, that was your weapon. And it pierced deeper than any words ever could. Isn't it strange how predictable they became? Every jab, every guilt-laced apology, boom, every recycled excuse. They thought the play would still work. But you stopped watching the actors and started seeing the script. Your spiritual vision activated, and you chose not to attend the show. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. Proverbs 27:12. You saw the danger not with fear but with foresight. You walked away not to hurt them, but to heal yourself. And that's what confused them most. You became unreadable, no longer accessible for dissection, no longer editable by their mood swings. You weren't reacting, you were rising. Like Maya Angelou once said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And you did. You stopped explaining. You stopped second-guessing. You stopped proving, and your absence became your answer. They thought you were ambient, just background comfort to their chaos. But when your light dimmed, when your frequency disappeared, confusion took root. They had never thanked you, never honored how you held space, absorbed storms, diffused tension. They never realized your worth until the weight of your absence crushed their illusions. Do not cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot. Matthew 7:6. You had been offering them pearls your time, your grace, your presence, but they mistook it for something disposable. So you withdrew, not with vengeance, but with divine resolve. And the longer you stayed gone, the more their structure unraveled. No message, no comeback, just stillness. And in that stillness, they began to hear echoes. They never noticed the weight of everything they had once dismissed. Silence from someone who was once the calm in their storm. That silence became thunder. Think of Mr. Rogers, how his gentle tone shook Congress. He never raised his voice. But truth doesn't need volume to shake a room, and that's the power you now walk in. Your silence is not void. It is sacred. It is legacy. It is revelation. They thought your absence was a moment of sulking, a tactic, a game. But then the days passed, then weeks, and still no return. Not just physical distance, but spiritual detachment. Your soul closed the door without slamming it. No grudge, just awakening. You didn't ghost them, you outgrew the environment, and in that growth, you broke the generational pattern of always being the one who fixes, who forgives, who folds. That pattern is now dust. That chain is now shattered. You used to be the force that brought stability to their chaos. Now you are the silence that reveals just how unstable it always was. Think of Meghan Markle. Her quiet departure from royal life was misunderstood by many, but it became a global reckoning. Not through spectacle, but through sovereignty. She claimed her peace, and that peace spoke louder than any headline. That's what your departure has done. It has unsettled the ones who never imagined you'd walk away, who never believed you'd find the door. And now, chosen one. The roles have shifted not through drama, but through divine reordering. The foundation they relied on has vanished. The love they abused, the energy they expected, the steadiness they mistook for servitude, it is gone. And what wounds them now is not your wrath. It's your absence, not your screaming, but your sovereignty. It's your neutrality that pierced the deepest. Because nothing is louder to the prideful than being met with silence by the loyal. They expected sparks. They found stillness. They tried to provoke the storm, but encountered peace, and that disarmed them more than confrontation ever could. They will fight against you, but will not overcome you. For I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Jeremiah 1:19. God covered your spirit, shielded your peace, and propelled your purpose without you ever needing to lift a finger in defense. What they once mocked as weakness was actually the gate to your strength. What they misread as apathy was protection. And now, they grieve, not because they lost someone they honored, but because they lost access to something sacred. They lost proximity to grace. There is no revenge in your story, only release. No bitterness, only becoming. You didn't exit with rage. You didn't burn the house down. You exited with a whisper that echoed louder than any scream, a breath of finality that reverberated through every room they once assumed you'd never leave. And now, the places where your presence once held the atmosphere steady, those places tremble in your absence. You left without spectacle, but your silence became a reckoning. Just as Ruth turned from the familiar and walked into divine provision. So have you stepped into a chapter authored not by pain, but by providence, powered by stillness, protected by discernment. Chosen one, you have become unreadable to the ones who once fed off your forgiveness. You've become unpredictable to those who used your mercy as a pattern. You are no longer accessible, no longer editable. You are free, you are clear, you are untouchable. And maybe the real mystery is this was your silence, ever silence at all. Or was it the sound of heaven closing a door with finality? They thought they were wearing you down, breaking you in pieces. Every jab, every twist of truth, every silent sabotage, they thought it was cutting you. But all along, they were becoming the very tools that sharpened your edge, what they designed to destroy. God used to refine. What they launched to confuse, God used to clarify. They thought they were writing your ending, but God was editing their access. A sharper version of you was being forged in the fire of secrecy, not through retaliation, but through revelation. Can you feel it now? Every deception became a layer of discernment. Every manipulation became another dot on the divine map. What they meant to be misdirection became your manual. Genesis 50:20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. And as they tried to bend your reality, you built a sacred archive. You logged tone shifts, tracked the bait, decoded the pattern. While they were performing behind curtains, you were preparing in silence. They thought they controlled perception. But it was your clarity that quietly claimed command. You stopped reacting and started interpreting. You no longer swung blindly at shadows. They revealed themselves again and again until their own patterns betrayed them. Their consistency gave them away. And that's what destroyed them most, not your anger, not your retaliation, but your detachment. You didn't confront them. You didn't explain. You didn't participate in the unraveling. You simply stood back and they had to look into the mirror of your absence. That's when truth showed its face. Look at Malcolm X, once known for fire and fury, but in his later years, he evolved. Not weaker, wiser. Not louder, deeper. He became unreadable to those who thought they knew him. He became a force of spiritual restraint. And so have you. You didn't become cold. You became clear. They wanted your fire, but got your silence, and your silence told them everything they feared. It told them they had no hold on you. You didn't mimic their weapons. You studied them as warnings. Each manipulation was no longer a puzzle. It was a flag, a signal, a closure. Be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Matthew 10:16. And that's what you became. Wise in your observation, pure in your posture. They expected combustion. They got calculation. They prepared for chaos. Instead, they stumbled into your quiet command, and that unnerved them more than war ever could, because self-mastery, rooted in divine timing, is a terrifying strength to those who cannot control it. Do you remember Michelle Obama targeted, twisted, talked about but never derailed? She once said, "When they go low, we go high." And she did, not with retaliation, but with poise, not with venom, but with vision. And in doing so, she disarmed critics and empowered generations. You've done the same. Chosen one. Not by clapping back, but by rising above. Not by fleeing chaos, but by seeing clearly through it. You didn't dodge traps. You stepped past them like one who already knows the ending. That's not ignorance. That's insight. Divine insight. While they invested in chaos, you invested in composure. They mistook your stillness for submission. But you were never bowing. You were building. And what you've built now can't be shaken. They never realized it was strategy. They mistook your stillness for softness, your calm for confusion. But the wise store up knowledge, and the mouth of a fool invites ruin. Proverbs 10:14. You were never blind to their actions. You were studying them not to strike, but to build sacred boundaries. And now those boundaries stand like fortified gates, guarding your peace with divine authority. The goal was never destruction. It was illumination. You were never trying to win a war. You had already won the moment you refused to fight one designed to drain your spirit. You weren't avoiding conflict out of fear. You were rising above it out of wisdom. Think of Viktor Frankl, who endured hell not with hatred, but with meaning. He witnessed his captors but never became them. His silence was his resistance. His clarity was his power. And so it is with you, chosen one. You've chosen a resistance the world doesn't understand, not violent, not loud, but surgical. Every time you didn't react, you reclaimed sovereignty. Every moment you held your tongue, your spirit was training. They thought they were performing, but you were observing. They were improvising their tactics, but you were tracing patterns. What they thought was fresh manipulation was just a worn-out script, and eventually, their predictability collapsed the illusion they had crafted. You didn't need to say, "I see you." Your silence spoke it. The fact that you stopped showing up mentally, emotionally, energetically, that was your response. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint. Whoever has understanding is even-tempered. Proverbs 17:27. You weren't just enduring their attacks. You were evolving through them. What once felt like disorientation became discernment. You no longer announce your power, it lives in your posture. You don't explain your worth, it is revealed in your absence. They expected to shape a pawn, but you became a presence too big to fit the board. You became unreadable, unbothered, uncontrollable, and that was the reversal they never saw coming. They spent so much time pulling strings, never realizing they were revealing their entire playbook. Each manipulation became a monument to your maturity. Their chaos didn't break you, it revealed your clarity. When truth rose, it didn't scream, it stood tall. And it stood through storms they thought would level you. They tried to shake your foundation, but only proved how deep your roots go. So now the deeper question is, this was the silence weakness, or was it the quiet unfolding of a power they lacked the depth to understand? You didn't match their energy because your calling demanded higher ground. And now, while they wrestle with the weight of their own consequences, you remain untouched. Not because you fought harder, but because you no longer needed to fight at all. That is your power now, chosen one. The kind of power that walks through fire and doesn't flinch. The kind of power that births light from shadow. The kind of power that watches the trap fall apart, not with satisfaction, but with the knowing truth always rises. And now, the calm they once mocked has become the sound that won't leave them. The stillness they ridiculed has become the very thing haunting their conscience. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't expose them. You didn't retaliate. And still your silence is louder than any confrontation could have ever been. Why? Because they expected chaos. They rehearsed for war. They were armed for your fury. But what they met was your refusal to descend, and that undid them. Not in a moment, but in memory. Because the ego can survive a battle, but it cannot survive irrelevance. They no longer replay your words, they replay their own actions. Every twist, every taunt, every unprovoked game, and this time, pride can't protect them. Only truth remains, and the truth stings. Not because you shouted it, but because you said nothing at all. That stillness, holy, steady, sovereign, became the most undeniable truth of all. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:21. You overcame not by war, but by walking away. Not by fighting shadows, but by outgrowing the need to prove yourself to them. They believed they were conducting the rhythm that you were adjusting to their chaos. But while they danced for attention, obsessed with control, you quietly changed the entire stage beneath their feet. You weren't reacting. You were rebuilding. You weren't still. You were being restructured. What they called indecision was divine delay. What they mocked as hesitation was actually heaven's recalibration. And now the ground they stand on is gone, not because you destroyed it, but because you outgrew it. Because the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, while haste leads only to poverty. Proverbs 21:5. And while they scrambled to be seen, you aligned to be whole. That's what they never understood. Your silence was never the absence of power. It was the birthing of it. Every pause was calculated. Every breath, every delay, every silence. It was never empty. It was design. It was blueprint. It was prophecy in motion. While they were consumed with performance, you were consumed with purpose. You moved like one who was being guided by something deeper, something unseen. They couldn't see it. They were too busy watching for a reaction, never realizing the silence was strategy. Remember Steve Jobs? Cast out from the very empire he built, he said nothing. No smear, no scandal, just silence. But it wasn't emptiness, it was evolution. He didn't return with rage. He returned with revelation. He didn't argue. He redesigned. And the ones who mocked him were still playing the same joke when he came back and rewrote the rules. That's you. Chosen one. That's exactly what you've done. While they recycled provocations, you rewrote the foundation. While they stayed stuck in cycles, you stepped out of the system entirely. They thought they had you trapped in a maze of reaction, but you were quietly studying the walls so you could walk out of them, not with rebellion, but with reinvention. What looked like surrender was just the shedding of an outdated skin. What they thought was retreat was the restructuring of your identity. They saw stillness and thought weak, but what they couldn't see was that every quiet moment was a blueprint being drafted, one they would never gain access to. And when the final form appeared, it was already too far ahead for them to reach. That's the truth of evolution. Not everyone gets to follow. They kept trying to bait a version of you that no longer existed. And when they called your name, the echo answered back. That version is gone. Their strategies weren't just ineffective, they were expired. Like trying to summon fire with wet matches. Think of Serena Williams. She was insulted, mocked, ridiculed, but her silence was never weakness, it was focus. She didn't need to speak to every attack, she let her excellence respond. She changed the game by playing better, not by shouting louder. You've done the same. You outgrew the frame. You redesigned the arena. They were still playing checkers, you were building the board. By the time they realized the game had shifted, you weren't even playing it anymore. Their roles became irrelevant. Their tactics bounced off the walls of your silence. Their triggers failed. You didn't stop responding out of apathy, you stopped because you transcended the entire conversation. And those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings like eagles. Isaiah 40:31. You didn't disconnect to defeat them. You disconnected because they no longer aligned with who you were becoming. Their conflict became a solo performance. Shouted into an empty room. They kept knocking on a door that heaven had already removed. You, chosen one, have moved into another dimension. Their words fall flat not because you didn't hear, but because you no longer need to reply. That is not emotional evasion. That is spiritual preservation. That is divine alignment. Bruce Lee said it best, be like water. And you were. You flowed. You adapted. You became formless in their grasp. You slipped out of the molds they tried to place you in. Now they recycle old strategies while you've become untouchable. Not because you ran, but because you rose. That's what spiritual elevation does. It doesn't fight manipulation, it renders it obsolete. And what's left now? Confusion. Not for you, but for them. You're not on the battlefield they trained for. They were ready for a fight, not for your freedom. They thought provocation was power. But peace, that sacred, anchored, heavenly peace, was always the higher force. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Matthew 5:9. You walked away without a sound, and yet your absence left an echo they cannot outrun. Their identity was built on your reaction. And now they have none. No war, no fire, no resistance, just the deafening stillness of their own reflection. They don't replay your words anymore, they replay their own choices, their own chaos. And that echo, that holy silence, has become the most haunting sound of all. You didn't evolve to defeat them. You evolved to deliver yourself. And in doing so, you became unreachable to what once controlled you. Now they toss sparks into a field that no longer burns. And they're stunned when nothing catches. The fire is gone, because the match has moved on. You are the wildfire that rose into wind. You're no longer flammable, you're elemental. Can you feel it now, chosen one? The confusion stirring in their camp, the unraveling that came not through confrontation but through your calm. They circle a battlefield that no longer exists. They rehearse lines for a play that has no stage. They practice tactics for an opponent who has already left the arena. Because what they never understood was this: when you rise in Seoul, the battle ends without a fight. You dismantled the entire game without ever announcing the demolition. They were waiting for collapse, but what you gave them was clarity. The silence they once mocked became your shield, your language, your strategy. They assumed you'd be frozen where they left you, but instead, you evolved into someone unrecognizable, unreachable, untouchable. They set the stage expecting noise, a meltdown, some public unraveling. But when the curtain lifted, there was no chaos. There was only your calm departure and an empty space where their audience used to be. How do you unsettle someone who thrives on disorder? You starved them of participation. You didn't just walk away from their war, you transcended the entire battlefield. And now their words land flat, not because they've softened, but because you no longer echo them with your energy. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. Exodus 15:2. You stopped defending yourself because you started dwelling above the level of accusation. Your transformation wasn't built for applause. It was sacred, quiet, internal. While they scattered chaos like confetti, you reordered your soul in the shadows. You weren't avoiding them. You were ascending, just like Eleanor Roosevelt, who absorbed relentless pressure without ever surrendering her dignity. Her transformation happened far from the spotlight through resilience, wisdom, and sacred resolve, and so did yours. While they sought to provoke, you cultivated discipline. While they craved scandal, you invested in legacy. You were never meant to match their expectations. You were meant to exceed their understanding. Every insult they hurled became raw material. Every jab a stone you used to build a higher place. They threw emotional debris. You didn't stop to clear it. You simply laid a foundation over it. By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. Proverbs 24:3. You were building, not breaking, studying, not reacting, elevating, one sacred, intentional step at a time. They wanted a show. You gave them something far more powerful: silence, wrapped in purpose. Not emptiness, not apathy, but the kind of stillness that speaks louder than any explanation ever could. That silence became your sword. Unused, but unstoppable. They couldn't twist it, couldn't bait it, couldn't weaponize it. Why? Because it was never about them. Your growth was never revenge, it was revelation. And that revelation rewrote the entire narrative. Think of J, K, Rowling rejected, unknown, struggling in silence. Yet she didn't lash out. She wrote, quietly, consistently, until her work became undeniable. She never needed to respond to the no's. Her story did it for her. That's you. While they whispered behind curtains and plotted in empty rooms, their voices echoed into places you had already outgrown. They speak to shadows now, unaware the light has moved. They still try to summon a version of you that no longer lives in your body. You didn't just leave the situation. You left the frequency. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Isaiah 43:18-19. And that new thing is you, a being reborn, rewritten, reformed by fire. They tried to narrate your downfall, but your refusal to engage became the rewrite they couldn't unhear. You didn't have to expose them. You simply became unreachable. You stopped needing to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you, and in doing so, you let the truth speak for itself slowly, clearly, irrevocably. Remember Chadwick Boseman, quiet in his pain, relentless in his purpose. No announcements, no self-pity, just excellence carried out in sacred rhythm. That's you. You no longer advertise your battles. You just arrive carrying light, power, and clarity that can't be faked. And what hurts them most isn't that you expose them, it's that you no longer care to respond. You became indifferent. Not with bitterness, but with peace. You stopped feeding the illusion. They're still baiting ghosts, still trying to provoke a version of you that was buried in transformation. That is true freedom when your old triggers sound like distant noise, and you don't even turn your head. When a man's ways please the Lord, even his enemies will be at peace with him. Proverbs 16:7. And the only way to win their game was to stop playing what's left now. A field of failed sparks. A stage lit for an act no one is watching. A silence they can't decode because it isn't laced with spite. It's crowned in freedom. You didn't change your tone. You changed the genre. You stopped surviving their chaos and began creating from clarity. You didn't pull them down. You rose without permission. Quietly, intentionally, permanently. And now, the question they can't answer is the one you've stopped asking. Why do they still need you to collapse when you've already risen beyond their reach? That's the truth of your transformation. Chosen one. You didn't win. You transcended. You became the ending they never saw coming. Have you ever watched a storm roll in not with fear, but with that sacred stillness that only someone with spiritual vision can carry? That's how heaven watched you. Silent, focused, anointed, already knowing where the lightning would strike and that none of it would touch you. While those around you misread it as vacancy, they assumed a quiet face meant an empty mind. But what they couldn't fathom was that behind your silence, you were mapping storms, tracing every cloud, every current, every gust of manipulation and mood. Be still, and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. And in that divine stillness, you heard what their noise drowned out. You saw what their chaos tried to hide. You read the hesitation in a trembling voice, the flicker behind a forced smile, the subtle tremor in a rehearsed apology. You didn't miss a thing. Every cue became data. Every contradiction became a coordinate, until the fog they thought would blind you sharpened your sight like steel against whetstone. They believed you were cornered in confusion. But weren't you simply letting the maze reveal its own exits? Picture Einstein, tucked away in the Swiss patent office, quietly examining other people's ideas while holding cosmic equations in his mind, formulas that would later shake the pillars of science. Did his superiors see brilliance in his stillness, or did they mistake it for simplicity? The same way your contemplative silence was read as passivity when in truth, it was revolution in incubation. Every time they nudged a boundary, you logged the pressure point. Each provocation recorded itself in the quiet archive of your spirit. You didn't overlook offenses out of weakness. A person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. Proverbs 19:11. You stored the patterns not to strike, but to dismantle the entire illusion. You knew that reacting would feed their formula, but restraint would fracture it, and so you waited not passively, but prophetically. How many times did they test you, convinced that a flare-up was imminent? How many traps were laid, expecting you to snap, but all they met was unreadable calm? They mistook your pause for paralysis, never imagining that you were sinking with a rhythm far above their reach. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. James 1:19. That became your internal triad. You became a walking filter, discerning sound from signal, separating noise from guidance. They moved in haste. You moved in alignment. The more they rushed, the more their choreography became transparent, their steps predictable bait, trigger, distort, repeat. And you, before their dance even began, already knew the steps they would take. Isn't it something how predictability exposes counterfeit authority? Think of Rosa Parks. That single silent refusal on a Montgomery bus redrew the lines of a nation. Her power didn't scream. It stood. It waited. It shifted everything. Your stillness has carried that same weight, not passive, but positional. There is a time to be silent and a time to speak. Ecclesiastes 3:7. You discerned the hour for stillness and let their performance collapse under its own exhaustion. They moved in straight lines, provoke, wait, manipulate, win as if destiny obeyed the templates of the proud, but your design was never horizontal. It was vertical. You didn't consult your ego. You consulted eternity. While they plotted angles to yank your emotions, you moved in step with timeless cadence. True power flows from the source they never thought to acknowledge. That's why your silence was sacred. You spent no energy on spectacle. You wasted no breath on validation. You poured it all into vision. You chose depth over display. You chose alignment over attention. Keanu Reeves, floating through the chaos of Hollywood, untethered by noise, wrapped in his own quiet gravity, watchful, wise, untouched. That's what your energy became. You wore peace like a robe. You let repetition expose itself. You let illusion trip over its own weight. When they searched for cracks, they found only still waters. When they reached for a reaction, they found no flame, only an unbothered horizon. Isn't it breathtaking how calm, when rooted in conviction, can rattle the loud far more than confrontation ever could? Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. Habakkuk 2:3. They scrambled for quick wins. You sowed seeds of permanence. They chased applause. You cultivated legacy. Their urgency built houses on sand, but your rhythm laid bedrock. Your delays weren't stagnation, they were sacred construction. By the time they noticed the shift, the foundation had already changed beneath their feet. They tried to make sense of your stillness while the floor rearranged itself under their assumptions and across oceans. Greta Thunberg stood in silence with a single sign, alone, unshaken. Her whisper became a wave. One still act turned into global motion. That is the kind of stillness you've carried. That is the kind of silence you've mastered. It's not absence, it's arrival. No microphone, just a placard. One still presence ignited a global movement. Greta's silence became a spark, and so did yours. Your quiet stance functions the same way. It doesn't seek mass approval, it is backed by something far more powerful: purpose. While they juggled optics, you tracked every slip. While they built narratives, you let truth ferment unrushed, unshaken. Eventually, the story outgrew the lie. The drama became predictable. The theatrics turned stale, and the stillness they once labeled hesitation revealed itself as mastery, undeniable, unwavering, complete. Proverbs 19:11, James 1:19, Psalm 46:10, Ecclesiastes 3:7, Habakkuk 2:3. These scriptures no longer sit on separate pages. They now converge in your life as living testimony. Wisdom waits. It listens. It watches. And when it moves with divine precision. You didn't chase space. You made it. You didn't scramble for power. You built it through holy restraint. Their strategy relied on your impulsive reaction. Yours thrived in sacred delay. And isn't it the sweetest justice of all that the silence they scorned became the fortress they cannot breach? So here we are. They comb through memories, trying to decode when you saw it, how you knew, what you felt because something shifted, something irreversible. Their linear logic no longer computes in the multi-dimensional reality you now move in. You're not on their timeline. You're on heaven's. You didn't need to take control. You mastered your reaction. You didn't miss the game. You watched it unfold, then stepped off the board entirely. And now the only question left echoing in their minds is the one you already answered in stillness long ago. How do you counter a move that refuses to be played? Now they sit among the rubble of what they tried to build, not because you tore it down, but because your absence exposed what was never solid to begin with. Their structure was illusion manipulation dressed as meaning, performance parading as substance. And when the pressure came, not from attack, but from silence, it collapsed under its own fraudulence. What remains is not shock over what you did, but bewilderment over what you refused to do. You didn't push. You didn't fight. You didn't defend. You walked. And the weight of their own deception brought it all to the ground. And now, as they clutch at fragments, you move forward calm, unbothered, intact. Because what you built was never reactionary. It was holy. It was formed in wisdom, not revenge. You didn't scale walls built from pride. You let them dissolve beneath your stride. That's why you now walk through doors they can't even perceive, because they were never given the blueprint. Their ascent was manipulation. Yours was mastery. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Psalm 127:1. They labored in deception. You sowed in truth. They never realized you weren't trying to win their game, you were transcending it. You didn't follow the ruled route. You rewrote the blueprint. When they interpreted your stillness as surrender, they missed the divine law already in motion. You didn't react. You didn't warn. You simply observed because you understood what they never could. Energy moves. And truth always arrives on time. Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows, Galatians 6:7. And while they sowed in disorder, you prepared ground for purpose. Look to Harriet Tubman. She didn't debate with her captors, but She didn't ask permission for justice. She moved, quietly, strategically. And by the time the world realized her impact, she was already too far to reach. That is the spirit you now walk in. You didn't interrupt their downfall. You honored the harvest while they clung to optics. You anchored in alignment each time they cycled the same manipulative moves, thinking they had you cornered. You were shedding dead weight. You weren't resisting their pressure. You were outgrowing it. And what happens when the walls close in on someone who no longer lives inside them? Nothing. You stopped engaging. You expanded. And by the time they noticed, you were already flourishing in dimensions they couldn't enter. You didn't hide. You evolved. And evolution cannot be caged. Now do you see it, chosen one? They built the prison, and now they live in it. The same trap they crafted for you has become their own enclosure. While they buried you in silence, your roots reached deeper. You rose not by climbing over them, but by allowing the ground beneath them to shift. He lifts the poor from the dust and the needy from the garbage dump. He sets them among princes in Psalm 113, 7-8. You let truth lift you. You let clarity carry you. They thought their scheme would trap you, but instead, it exposed them. And all you had to do was remain still and let reality do its work. Because once truth begins to settle, it becomes the most powerful force in the room. Think of Frida Kahlo. Her suffering was visible, her wounds unmistakable, but she rarely explained herself. She turned pain into pigment, trauma into testimony. She let her work, not her retaliation, speak. And you, chosen one, have done the same. You let your growth, not your arguments, carry the message. While they waited for your collapse, you were crafting your rise. They didn't watch with compassion, they watched with calculation. Hoping to confirm the distorted version of you they sold behind closed doors. Every quiet season, every retreat into solitude, they misread as weakness. But they didn't want your healing, they wanted a collapse dramatic enough to justify their betrayal. And when it never came, when the meltdown they counted on turned into momentum, they were left empty-handed. You didn't spiral. You didn't rage. You didn't entertain the script they rehearsed. You gave them the greatest disruption of all: nothing. No explosion, no spectacle, just holy distance. And in that distance, you found your clarity. Your absence wasn't hiding. It was sacred reconstruction. You didn't disappear in shame. You stepped back to make sacred space for a resurrection. They thought your silence was a countdown to collapse. But it wasn't counting down to failure, it was counting up to reformation. They didn't see the labor behind closed doors, the confronting of trauma, the rewriting of generational patterns, the healing that didn't ask for applause, only truth. Remember Naomi Osaka stepping away from the spotlight, not for escape, but for alignment. Critics demanded performance. She chose presence. That decision, mocked at first, became a movement. You did the same. You chose wholeness over optics, healing over image. And now the very ones who accused you of weakness are bewildered by your peace. You didn't run from the pain, you met it. You peeled it back layer by layer. You traced the wires they tried to tangle. And while they whispered, measuring your stillness as failure, you were constructing something unshakable. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118:22. They waited for you to validate their betrayal, but you gave them nothing. No chaos, no confirmation, no collapse. And that silence, that refusal to perform, shattered their illusion. Because nothing unravels a manipulator faster than someone who no longer responds. They tried to bait drama. You built depth. They reached for control. You reached for vision. They operated in fear. You moved in truth. Now all they can do is watch doors close to them. Watch rooms open to you. Watch your name move through places they tried to sabotage. They tried to shape perception, but you shaped reality. You didn't win by being louder, you won by being rooted. You will be like a tree planted by streams of water, yielding fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither. Psalm 1:3. You stopped reacting. You started becoming. And where are they now, trapped in the story they built, choking on their own script, navigating a maze that only ever led to their own confusion? They still don't understand how they lost a game you never played. That's the wound. You never fought them. You outgrew them. You didn't conquer them. You simply became unavailable. You didn't retaliate. You transcended. And now they sit in silence with a question they can't escape. What do you do when the one you buried becomes the soil that swallows your lies? That, chosen one, is your legacy, not revenge but resurrection, not collapse but clarity, not warfare but wisdom. You didn't need to shout, you didn't need to explain, you let the truth rise. And now it stands taller than any accusation. While their performances fade into dust, your presence grows in stillness. You didn't break the system. You walked out of it and became the blueprint for something holier. They miscalculated everything. They believed your healing required an audience, that your recovery needed a crowd, a confession, or a curated comeback. But you were never built for the spotlight. You were built for substance. What they couldn't see and still can't understand is that your transformation needed no validation. It needed solitude. You didn't rise through recognition. You rose through revelation. And while they watched the surface, anticipating breakdowns they could weaponize, you were rebuilding in depths where their narratives couldn't reach. So when you returned balanced, steady, radiant, they weren't stunned by what they saw. They were stunned by what they didn't see. No evidence of collapse, no trace of their storm, just presence, just peace. They expected rage, you gave them reinvention. They hoped for a reaction to shake your core, to pull you backward, but what they encountered instead was your evolution. How could they ever track it? When they were only looking for explosions, they waited for chaos, not transformation. They searched the sky for smoke, unaware the fire had long moved inward, refining, not destroying. And the God of all grace, after you have suffered a while, will himself restore you, make you strong, firm, and steadfast. That is what happened in the stillness. While they looked for collapse, heaven was crafting your foundation. While they anticipated spectacle, you became sacred. Think of Maya Angelou, how she carried her scars with silence and her spirit with royalty. She never needed to prove her survival. Her being, her voice, her dignity were the evidence. And you, chosen one, you carry the same quiet clarity. You don't need to explain the fire. The glow on your face and the peace in your presence say it all. Yet they remain stuck rereading old chapters of a version of you that no longer exists, clinging to outdated images while you walk boldly into a narrative they were never qualified to narrate. That's the part they never calculated for, that you'd outgrow the map, that you'd stop playing the part they assigned. They thought they knew your rhythm, but you changed the entire song. They played with your name while you rebuilt your identity. They told stories while you lived transformation. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Isaiah 43:18-19. And now they're stuck, not because you owe them silence, but because you owe yourself freedom. They misread your detachment as defeat, but your silence became their maze. Where they once saw vulnerability, they now see velocity. They assumed you were powered by their praise, wired into their moods, hinged on their acceptance, but you were never plugged into their system. They pulled strings, dropped bait, laid emotional snares, but you, chosen one, had already cut the cord. You weren't performing for healing. You were healing for yourself. You weren't protesting with your absence. You were birthing purpose in it. While they mistook your stillness for surrender, you were already constructing something beyond their reach. Think of Oprah Winfrey as a young black woman in media, dismissed and overlooked. She didn't retaliate with rage. She redirected her energy and built a platform that outlived and outshined every limitation ever placed on her. Your story mirrors that frequency. While they rehearsed scenes to corner you, you were rewriting the genre. They thought they were the authors, but you, in your silence, became the pen. Every jab they delivered, every tactic they deployed, it was unknowingly handing you the blueprint. You watched, not with fear, but with purpose. You didn't confront them, you bypassed them, and that is what shattered their control. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Proverbs 27:12. You saw the chaos and rewired your compass. You didn't argue. You aligned. Their traps became teachings. Their betrayal became permission to finally release what no longer served your spirit. While they manufactured conflict, you manufactured liberation. What they thought was your failure to engage was your preparation to lead. They built stages hoping you'd collapse in public, but you never showed up to the performance. You were behind the scenes, redesigning the architecture of your soul. And now, when they try to bait you with familiar scripts, they find you absent, not hiding, but healed. They thought healing meant public catharsis, but you knew better. You knew that private victories echo the loudest. Think of Nelson Mandela, decades behind bars, and yet he emerged not bitter, but balanced, not shouting, but shaping nations. His transformation happened in the dark, and so did yours. You weren't silent because they deserved it. You were silent because you did. And now, they scramble, not because you ruined their plans, but because you never needed them in yours. They were fueled by being feared. You became unshakable. They lived for drama. You lived for depth. They performed. You built. And when they looked for your reaction, they found your absence. But your absence wasn't void. It was victory. It was evolution. Your silence wasn't lack. It was legacy. Even a fool is considered wise when he keeps silent, and discerning when he holds his tongue. Proverbs 17:28. Your refusal to engage didn't mean you didn't see. It meant you no longer needed to be seen by them. They can't trace your path now, not because you disappeared, but because they were too focused on narrating your past, while you moved into a future they'll never be ready for. And what a divine reversal it is. The same silence they once tried to weaponize now speaks with authority. The same patience they mocked as confusion has become the very source of your power. While they dug trenches waiting for your fall, you were building bridges not to return but to ride. And those bridges, beloved, are not for them. Not because of punishment, but because they never learned the terrain. They never honored the soil you had to till with your tears. They cannot follow what they refuse to understand. You were never meant to stay in their story. You were sent to write your own. You didn't just recover. You resurrected. You didn't merely escape. You expanded. You didn't fight to prove. You surrendered to truth, and truth won for you. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. And now, the final irony, they still think you're trying to prove something. But the light on your face, that's not a signal to them. That's a covenant with yourself. It is not a performance. It is presence, not for applause, but for alignment. You made it quietly, completely, divinely. And that is the kind of victory they cannot predict, cannot possess, and cannot pretend to understand. So let them guess. Let them whisper. Let them scroll through fragments of who you used to be, searching for signs of control that no longer exist. Because you no longer owe them explanation. You owe yourself expansion. And that question, how did they do it, will echo through every room you've outgrown, every cycle you've broken, every space that your spirit no longer resides in. That chosen one is the reward of healing done in silence, a life that testifies without speaking. A legacy no lie can erase, a soul so rooted in God, it cannot be manipulated by man. So now, beloved chosen one, pause, just for a moment, and feel the hush that has carried you here. Can you hear it? How every quiet decision now echoes like a drumbeat in the halls of heaven. Can you feel how the stillness they misunderstood is now radiant with purpose? You have not walked alone. Your journey proves what only the refined truly understand. Restraint is not weakness, it is wisdom wearing its strongest armor. In a world loud with ego and performance, you chose something rare. You chose to build in silence, to grow in stillness, to be reborn without needing applause. And now, as this message closes not with noise, but with reverence, I ask you to look back with holy awe. How many storms were calmed because you didn't react? How many traps collapsed under their own weight because you refused to take the bait? How many angels guarded your path because you chose silence over spectacle? You stayed silent, and you won, not by accident, not by avoidance, but by divine design. In that silence, you walked beside the God who parts seas without sound, the one who hides his strongest warriors in quiet places, the one who anoints without ceremony and elevates without announcement. So before anything else, let me say with the fullness of my spirit, thank you. Thank you for walking this sacred path, for listening all the way through, for sharing your unseen victories, and for proving day after day that endurance is louder than ego. Your presence here does not just consume a message, it becomes the message. You transform this space into something holy, and I am deeply humbled by your quiet courage, your sacred fire. And now, may I ask something of you? If this word breathed life into your bones, if it reminded you of what heaven already declared over you, if it confirmed what your soul always suspected, will you help amplify it? Will you help send this sound to the hidden ones still walking through their own holy silence? If you feel led, you may sow a seed through the super thanks below. But know this clearly, your value was never measured by giving. You are seen, you are honored, you are held whether or not you ever give a dime. What you offer with your presence, your spirit, and your endurance is already priceless. And so I leave you here, not at the end but at the edge of a new beginning. The silence they feared has become the sound that heaven now echoes. Walk forward, chosen one, quiet, whole, unshaken. Because this was never about revenge. This was always about revelation. If all you have to offer in this moment is a whispered amen, a silent agreement, a word in the comments, or a single heartbeat of prayer, know this. It is more than enough, priceless to timeless, unseen by algorithms but treasured in heaven. Your 99 of completion, your testimony shared in vulnerability. Your presence here, these are sacred currencies the world cannot quantify. And yet, if you do feel led to give, if your spirit stirs to sow into this work, know that your contribution expands more than production. It stretches light into dark corners. It uplifts the silenced. It multiplies healing in places unseen. It fuels this mission not just for you, but for those who haven't yet heard they, too, are chosen. but whether you give with your hand or only with your heart. I bless you for simply being here, because presence is a gift the market cannot buy and heaven never overlooks. Now, chosen one, cast your eyes forward. What if your next level of impact requires an even deeper level of stillness? What if the door you've been praying to open isn't voice activated by volume, but by faith that has learned to wait? What if the giants you're meant to overcome are disarmed not by noise but by the force of a soul that refuses to be moved? Will you keep the sacred boundary around your mind, refusing to let chaos rent space in your imagination? Will you guard your peace like royalty, knowing that silence doesn't mean passivity, it means power under divine restraint? Will you honor the sacred lessons carved into your quiet seasons, lessons about pacing, trusting, surrendering, and rising? Imagine facing tomorrow's uncertainty with the same calm that carried you through yesterday's accusation. Imagine answering every provocation not with panic, but with a question to heaven. Could it be that the very mysteries you long to solve are already unfolding in you quietly like a seed breaking open beneath the soil? Long before it's seen above, so I speak this blessing over you. May the peace that passes understanding become your fortress. May the God who rewards in secret multiply every unseen sacrifice. May doors swing wide where sabotage once waited. May your silence continue to speak a language only truth can translate. May your life remain a scroll of living testimony read aloud by the goodness of God. If critics gather again, may their words dissolve before they reach your ears. If shadows rise, may your light stretch taller. If weariness whispers, may divine strength rise louder still. And may your household, your work, your every step be drenched in such evident favor that even those who doubted you will say, "We witnessed a miracle. I call forth creativity in your quiet time, provision where there was once drought, friendships formed in glory, not gossip. Let the right resources recognize you. Let divine timing meet every delay. Let every gate swing open when heaven calls your name. And finally hold this truth close: you are not called to prove. You are called to become. You are not summoned to the spotlight of reaction, but invited into the sanctuary of revelation. And revelation grows best in still waters. So keep watering your future with intentional silence. Keep tending your boundaries like sacred gardens. Keep trusting that heaven has never missed a whisper, never overlooked a tear, never wasted a wilderness. One day, the very rooms that dismissed your quiet presence will echo with stories of your undeniable rise. Until then, walk softly, carry blessing. And remember, the Lion of Judah roars on your behalf, even when your lips do not. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for every seed sown, for every super thanks, for every word of encouragement. But above all, thank you for being living proof that silence aligned with purpose is undefeatable. May grace chase you, may peace guard you, and may your victory be so effortless. The only explanation left is that it was divine.